Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 4, Episode 19, Hard Time. Before we continue, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. And yes, I know, Twitter, never mind. Forget that.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yes, David is right. You can find us all those places. You can find our old stuff through Twitter, but there hasn't been any updates on Twitter for quite a while. The way the system works is pretty much, I don't know, it's completely changed, and every bit of feedback I get on it is basically like, that's done. I basically have to just start all over is pretty much the only option that we have.
Right.
And I'm not sure that I really want to do that. So.
I don't even know if Twitter's even the right name anymore now that it's been rebranded as X.
X. Yeah.
I have to say, I think that's dumb. That was a mistake.
I don't even know what to do with that. It's like,
it's
what
like
side are you on? I'm on X.
It's like buying a Ford, with the first vehicle of its kind, and then rebranding it as Q. Just like, wait a minute, you bought it because it was a thing, and now I don't know. I think it was a mistake to rename it, but who am I? I'm not the richest man in the world, so I don't get to make decisions like that.
I agree. I don't think that any brand that you have that's been around for that long, that kind of rebranding, especially a rebranding that you don't explain and didn't seem to be necessary. It wasn't caused by anything. It doesn't make any sense to me. That'd be like you said, that'd be like Ford or like Skittles or something changing their name.
The only reason someone changes their name is because it's a bad thing. Like Time Warner Cable was like, everyone hates us as Time Warner Cable, so now we're Spectrum. Okay.
Right. It's a changing. Yeah, you're trying to distance yourself from something negative. It's typically why you see rebranding. But there's no real explanation for it. And like you said, I'm not the richest man in the world. I don't have the company backing, and I'm sure that I would like to think that they did some kind of research or study or something that was like, we should rebrand or whatever. But who knows? Maybe he just woke up and said, nope, X, that's what we are now. That's it. And it's his company. So there you go.
All right. Well.
Yes. That's our little Twitter. All that to say, we're not on Twitter anymore. So you can find us anywhere else. That we're still on Facebook. We're still doing all that stuff, and you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. We're still there, of course. So if you and then of course we have YouTube. So if you want to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. We would appreciate that, as a matter of fact. But before we get into Hard Time, the 96th episode,
something like that.
Yeah, 96 for us, I think. 96 or 97 for us. Coming up on that big 3 digits.
100.
Yeah. So, we will get into that in just a minute. But first, as always, David, how was your week?
It was fine. I finished reading. So Vivek Ramaswamy is one of the Republican candidates. He's actually in third place amongst all 3 of the Republican candidates. Trailing third, basically everyone in third and beyond is just dividing the breadcrumbs. But he's an interesting character, interesting guy. He's written some books. The one that I just finished reading is called Capitalist Punishment. It's basically talking about how companies like BlackRock and Vanguard are their policies for deciding how to do things is flawed because he's started up his own competitive company to those big name investment firms. Interesting reading that, not the usual fiction or, a biography of someone, kind of more modern stuff. I'm not sure if he'd be good as president because some of his ideas I think are a little bit, I think in general he'd be fine as a Republican candidate, but some of his suggestions on certain things, I'm like, I don't know if that would work. I don't know if it's possible to say that only people 25 and older can vote, but if you're between 18 and 24, you have to pass a civics exam before you're allowed to vote. I'm like, that
Yeah,
how you can plan that on working. So
yeah, I don't like that at all. I mean, I have a problem with the drinking age being 21, but only because I feel like it should be 18. And I know there's people who are going to be like, why? And that's controversial and everything else. And there's so many reasons that we do it at 21. But at the same time, I'm like, if you at 18 are allowed to legally vote in this country, own a gun in this country, serve in our military and die in our wars in this country, the least you should be able to do is have a beer at the same time. So either we move all those things up to 21 or we move them all down to 18. It's not, that doesn't make any sense. That's the only, that's my only real argument for that. But the other stuff, no, like, come on.
I mean, I like what he's written, and he's written 3 books in 3 years, so he's got a lot to say. He's not like other politicians who write books just so they can earn some money. Like every single politician, when they're about to go run for a high office, they publish some crummy book that is like, here's why you should vote for me. And it's like, this is just a cash grab. But these actually feel like he's trying to say something. But anyway, so I read that this week. I am in the middle of reading the Expanse book. You and I are going to finish that hopefully this week, I think. And then I started reading American Prometheus, which is the book that inspired Oppenheimer, the movie. I'm going to start that this week. I read the preface today just to get it started. It's 600 pages, so that's going to take me a while.
Yeah, right. This is a man who consumed a whole book in like a couple of hours.
Dude.
Know, with the.
Well, I mean, I had to go to get my car worked on 2 weeks in a row. So like, I'm off on Tuesdays. So for like 4 hours each Tuesday in 2 weeks. So I had all this time to just sit there and read. So I was able to knock out a lot of the book in 2 sittings. But man, those books are so readable. I love the Expanse.
They really are. And like I this is something that we've obviously talked about a lot. Is I get jealous of the fact that you can just sit and read just endlessly until you're finished or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like I found myself yesterday with 2 solid hours of nothing to do.
Yeah.
And I just was burning through it, man. I was just reading, and I was like, man, it's like I got into it so quick, and I was like thinking about the show and everything else, so I was reading and everything, and I was like, man. And when the 2 hours was up, I couldn't believe it. I was like, really?
Yeah.
Like, okay. And I was kind of kicking myself because I wanted to keep reading, but and I was like, let's hurry up and get to the next book and stuff. But yeah.
I really enjoy them a lot. I was reading their Altered Carbon books recently, and those do not have the flow of just page turning flow. The Expanse books, I mean, anyone could read them. I don't think there's any argument to say that you don't have to be if you don't consider yourself a reader, someone who likes to read sci-fi, you could very easily pick these books up. They are a little long. Yeah. I mean, they're novel length books, but they're not.
I think that length helps, especially for people who, like you just said, who maybe you don't think of yourself necessarily as sci-fi inclined. Right. I think the length helps because there's a lot of extra stuff in there, not just in the way of explanations, but different things about the characters that help you to relate to the characters more. Right. So there are a lot of people who don't like sci-fi books because they feel like it gets all heavy into a lot of the tech stuff, the tech babble that they use to promote their do their sci-fi world building.
Right.
The Expanse doesn't do that a lot. There is some of that, don't get me wrong, but there's also a lot that's all about the characters and how they look or they feel and what's going on with them in reference to even other characters and stuff. So I think that, I totally agree. This would be a great series of books for people who don't find themselves typically grabbing sci-fi to go for.
I can see why they've been so successful.
Yeah.
Whenever I go to the bookstore and I go to the sci-fi section, there's always plenty of them ready to be bought and read. So,
and I would almost say it works pretty well as like a nice, fantastical, fictional account of political drama as well, because they do the politics for all of the different groups and factions and stuff. Yeah. They do them so well. So again, if you're not a sci-fi person, but you like that kind of political intrigue drama type, this could still work for you on that level as well.
Right. Yeah. The other book I have ready to go is Napoleon. I might have mentioned this last week. I mentioned that I bought a book on Napoleon because Ridley Scott announced in November he's doing a movie with Joaquin Phoenix. So I bought the biography that I had seen at the bookstore, and that's 800 pages. So I got Oppenheimer, which is 600. I got Napoleon, which is 800. So I think I don't have to read the Expanse books for a while. I'll have something else to read.
Okay. Well, that will give me some time to get caught up with you and maybe surpass you as well. Get into the next book, get ahead of you a bit.
Yeah. I really am looking forward to the next ones because based on the show, the next two are very important, and I can't wait. And then finally to move on to the last three to find out how the story continues.
Yes, that is the other part of it that's driving me nuts. Because I mean, we know that the series ended at 6. Right. We know there should be at least, if they're going by the books anyway, there should be 3 more.
Right.
So I want to know what happens. I want to know where it ended with the show, and all that. I want to know.
Yeah. All right, that's enough of me. I've been talking way too much. How about you? How's your week been?
It's been a little chaotic because I've been trying to. Obviously, I'm still doing the workouts, but my schedule keeps fluctuating. So trying to find a consistent time to work out has been a bit of a challenge. So I end up there sometimes where I'll go at like 4 a.m, and there's other times where it's, I'll have an extra long break in the afternoon, and so I'll go then. And then there are some evenings where it's, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, and there I am. I'm trying to I started off with the consistency of at least go every day. Right. And then it became, and so trying to make sure that happens is really exhausting because since you can't set a schedule of, okay, I'm going to go at 4 every morning. Okay, I'm going to go at noon every morning or every day or whatever it is. It gets really hard to try to figure out what all you need to do to get the time you need to go. Right. In addition to that, I have been, dealing with some family stuff. My mother has needed some things, and so I've been doing a lot with her. And then, of course, it is incredibly hot here in Texas, and I have been outside a lot. And normally this wouldn't necessarily be a problem. I don't think of myself as a person who has any kind of heat sensitivity or whatever you want to call it, but it's just been so hot that doing anything outdoors it's exhausting. It's just really exhausting. So I've been trying to get through and deal with that. And even today and yesterday, we were clearing a lot of stuff out of my mother's place. And so there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of heavy moving, a lot of, just a lot of working through things. Right. And I think it got to me a little bit because I didn't realize that I wasn't staying hydrated. I wasn't drinking a lot of water while I was doing this stuff. So then today, in trying to get things done, not only was I just sluggish, but I felt so bad, and I couldn't place my finger on why I was feeling so bad until actually fairly recently. And I took some Advil and some other things, and basically just kind of tried to up my hydration really quick. Right. And it does work. It's amazing how quickly that will turn you around when you're kind of on that downward spiral. Just some water, some Gatorade, some whatever, and you're back to yourself a bit. Right. So for all you people who are in the South and in Texas in particular, as we're going through this seemingly endless heat wave, stay hydrated, man. If you're outside for anything, really, make sure that when you get back inside, you drink some water and try to cool down and stuff, and just keep it on hand because it will definitely sneak up on you. And before you know it, you're out of it. That brain fog sets in so quick, and it's hard to function. It's hard to think about what you need to do until it kind of clears itself up. Right. True. But we are not here to talk about any of that. We are here to talk about Miles O'Brien and how he must suffer. It's the favorite pastime.
Yeah, O'Brien must suffer. Yep.
Yes. In this episode, he suffers. He suffers a lot. Yeah. So again, it's a hard time. It's in the 4th season. If you have not watched the episode, I would suggest you go and do so now. You can always pause this or come back to it or whatever it is. If you're listening to us live or watching us on YouTube Live, sorry, we're getting ready to spoil everything. So I apologize. You should have already watched the show. Again, it's 30 plus years old. So this is your fault. not ours. All right, this is totally your fault.
Yep.
Okay, and then later on, after we talk about the episode, there is another thing I want to talk about. Not just new Trek, but for those of you who are like really just in need of something Trek-like, there are some shows I would like to tell you about that you may be interested in. Okay, so we'll get to that. But Hard Time. So now I've given the last two breakdowns because they were great episode favorites of mine. I believe this one is all you. This is your turn.
All right, let's do it. All right, guys. So again, this episode is Hard Time. And the episode starts off with Chief O'Brien seemingly in a cell, old, with a beard and long hair. And some aliens come in and say, "You've served 20 years of your sentence. It's time for you to go." But instead of him leaving his cell, he actually wakes up to Kira and these aliens around him. And it turns out that he didn't actually just experienced 20 years of being in prison. Like, he didn't actually serve 20 years of prison. He experienced it in his mind with the ability of this alien culture, the Argrathi. They planted memories in his brain as a punishment for being convicted for espionage. Turns out, I assume this is on the other side of the wormhole because we see the runabout come through the wormhole. He was apparently on Argartha and was asking too many questions about a certain piece of technology, and they snatched him up, convicted him of espionage, and they don't actually use prisons. They use this technology that allows them to implant memories that they say cause the person to experience the as if they did go through a prison sentence, and for whatever was appropriate for their crime. So again, that means that O'Brien just experienced in the matter of hours what was effectively 20 years as in prison as a prison sentence. So he comes back to the station with Kira, and he is, as you can imagine, very traumatized by this experience. He is having to relearn what the tools are that he uses. Jake helps him relearn his tools. He's having to remember the fact that Keiko was pregnant. He's having to appreciate he reappreciates the beauty of the station. He is seriously affected by this 20 years memories of 20 years of being in prison. And of course, he is told that one of the things he needs to do is go to counseling to help him get over this. But if anyone knows O'Brien, they know that O'Brien doesn't want to be counseled, so he puts that off. And so while he is having trouble, connecting with people like Bashir and with Worf, he is also starting to see flashbacks of his time in prison. Now, he tells Dr. Bashir that he was alone the whole time, but it turns out that was not true. It turns out that in these fake memories, he had a cellmate named Ichar, who was a friend to him, a friendly guy. Who was even able to laugh in these, horrible cells that they were in. It's basically, there's never any indication that they ever leave the cell, but they're never fed on time. They have to, hoard food. And so, Miles hoards food at dinner with Keiko because that's where his brain is still at. He sleeps on the ground instead of in the bed because he can't get comfortable in the bed because he was sleeping on the ground in these memories. But Ichar, this cellmate of his, was someone who he talked with. Ichar would make, patterns in the sand at the bottom of their cell, and that's actually what we saw O'Brien doing when the episode opened, was drawing in the sand. But he says to Bashir that no, there's no one in there. It was just me. I was in there by myself the whole time. But he starts seeing visions of Ichar on the station. So he'll be looking around, and he initially mistakes Keiko for Ichar. And then he sees Ichar wandering around the station. And then eventually Ichar comes up to him and says, "Yes, I'm just a memory. I'm not real, but there is something wrong with you, and there's a reason that I am manifesting right now. You have trauma that you need to work through, and the fact that I am that I exist, even as a phantom, basically, is proof that you have things that need to be dealt with. This starts coming to a head for O'Brien when he starts losing his temper. Quarf is trying to serve a whole bar full of people, and O'Brien grabs him and holds him down and says, "Give me my synthale." His daughter says, "I want you to come draw with me," and he's trying to talk to Keiko because he's stressed. And well, actually, I should hold on. That does not happen quite yet. All these other things are happening. He's stressed. He's having a hard time kind of reconnecting. He's not taking his medication. He's not going to counseling. He does that what he did to Quark. And so Sisko calls him in and says, "You're off duty." And it's not that I'm saying you're off duty. It's Dr. Bashir that's saying you need to have a medical reason for being off duty. And that causes O'Brien to kind of have a little bit of breakdown. Like he throws his comm badge. And then when he goes home, he gets angry that his daughter is trying to get his attention. And he gets up and he almost smacks her. And that causes him great distress because he feels like not only can he not reconnect with people, but now he's actually a danger to his own family. So he goes down to one of the
cargo bays.
Yeah, and where there's a bunch of stuff, and he starts just smacking stuff around and kind of having a breakdown, just destroying everything in there. And he sees a weapons locker. He opens it, takes a phaser out, sets it to maximum, and holds it to his head. Fortunately, Bashir comes in and says to him, basically talks him down, says, just because this, alien society caused this trauma to you doesn't mean you can't come back from it. You haven't hurt anyone. You haven't hurt your family. There's nothing that's happened that is, the end of the world. There's no reason to take your life. Let's just, go. We'll go have you talk with the therapist and really commit to doing that. The cellmate HR that he's been having visions of agrees with that, and so when Bashir takes away the phaser, HR walks away and disappears, and so O'Brien is going to go get the treatment he needs to recover. So I think that's the major highlights. We can get into the details as we go on, but anything I should add before we move on?
No, that is essentially it. That is the high points, highlights. And again, if we miss anything, we're going to get into it with our little deep dive here. And you can go and watch the episode. So, as always, we have to remind people, I guess, every so often, David has never seen Deep Space Nine. He hasn't seen a lot of Trek. He's watched all of Next Generation, and now we're following this with Deep Space Nine. He hasn't seen any other shows. So, with that, I like to, obviously, as the first-time viewer, get your first impression. So, what did you think of this episode?
Oh, there was one major thing I forgot. I needed to say. The reason Bashir Miles was having such a breakdown is because when he admits to Bashir that he was lying about being alone in his cell, the reason that's important is because it was near the end of his time of the 20 years that he had a crucial breakdown in his relationship with HR. They were not being fed food. They, again, were hoarding it to try and keep themselves from starving to death because they weren't being fed regularly. And so they ran out of hoarded food. And O'Brien thinks that they were out, but HR had some left. He had a final stash that he was finally going to reveal. And O'Brien attacked and accidentally killed him in an attempt to get to the food, claiming that HR had been holding out on him. And so he feels guilty for having murdered someone. Again, not a real person. He didn't actually murder anybody, but as far as his memories go, he did. So that's the crucial part. He admits to the murder to Bashir, and that's the major part I forgot to mention. And the reason I'm talking about that, the reason I bring that up is why I thought this episode has a lot to say. It has a lot to say about PTSD and trauma and stuff like that. But I did feel like some of the explanation for what this is, like the details of what happened, are a little like I wish we could iron some things out. Like,
yeah,
why wouldn't he have known about the other stash of food? Why would Ichar have been holding out and yet not at the same time also be kind of wrong to have held out? Because he says, "Oh, you were holding it for both of us," because there were like 2 portions of the food that was in the cache. So it felt a little forced, like they've been in the cell for almost 2 decades by the time this event supposedly happens. How did O'Brien not know about this second stash? How did he get to the point where he'd be willing to kill his own friend? I mean, he's traumatized by the experience, so I get that. I'm not saying that's the part that is wrong. I'm just saying it felt a little forced for me that was the moment where things went bad, as opposed to I thought the episode was going to go in the route of the whole everything we're seeing is actually a part of the fake memories. Like it's going to be one of those episodes where it turns out the characters have been lied to the whole time and their memories have been fake the whole time and they have to escape this false reality. We've seen that plenty of times in Star Trek episodes. Dr. Bashir had one last season where he aged, in his version of it. But this is not what happened. This is legitimately he was traumatized by the experience of these aliens doing this to him. And so that has a lot to say about PTSD and how to respond to that. Suicide is not the answer to your problems, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's a good episode for those reasons. But as someone who is articulate about the plot, particular about the plot, I feel like there's some places to nitpick it a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's nitpicky stuff because we can take an hour to spend talking about the episode. So nitpick away, right?
So no, I definitely agree with you about the statement of, he at that ending where he kills Ichar over the secondary stash of food. And how is it that he didn't know it if it turns out that Ichar was a figment of his imagination and so forth? This is kind of one of those, whenever you're doing these kind of fake outs where you're not sure who's real and who's not, and the extent of anything like Fight Club, for example, would be another example. I think there's always going to be things like that because it's like you want us to believe for so long that this other person is a separate entity, but then when you do the reveal that they're not, then certain things like that don't make sense unless you have to kind of fully buy into the proposed psychosis that everything they're experiencing is so intense and extreme that it's caused this kind of internal schism that makes it to where they're literally unaware of what the other personality is doing to a certain extent. So you could say that's the route they were trying to go here, but at the same time they're also trying to make it sound like O'Brien is remarkably resilient. So for him to have the kind of split necessary for that scene to work, he would need to be not nearly as resilient as we're also led to believe that he is. So yeah, there's some disconnects there. I agree with that. But otherwise, I think this is, while I'll say that, while I think this is a good episode, it is not one that I like. And I don't like the episode because I didn't like the downward spiral so rapidly to suicide. And I don't think that we've ever really seen characters deal with suicide in this particular regard in Trek before. And maybe that's why it just doesn't sit well with me. I can still watch the episode and appreciate it for the acting, the writing, and so forth, because I do think they did a great job on those things. But for me personally, I just don't like that really dark aspect that they went to there of the him potentially committing suicide. And then also not really addressing it. He talks to Bashir a little bit and puts the phaser down and then goes back and hugs his daughter. Like, you literally just were trying to kill yourself like 2 scenes ago. There was no going to sick bay and getting checked out. We never saw Counselor Tilnori, who he was supposed to be working with the whole time. Never saw this person. So I mean, it's just like,
point, actually.
I would have loved to see a couple of scenes of that, of him trying at least to go to the counseling and having an interaction with the counselor and blowing up at them and being like, that's why he hasn't, because Bashir comes and talks to him. He's like, yeah, I just spoke with Dr. Tilnori and you haven't been in 10 days. I would have loved to have seen the episode or the part of the episode where he stormed out where he felt like Tilnori was being unreasonable or whatever it was, and left.
Yep.
And then that's why and then that could have been the next scene. You haven't been there in 10 days. And I mean, they do enough in the episode to at least lay the breadcrumbs that this is taking a long time. Like, again, you're supposed to go 3 times a week. You haven't been in 10 days, so we know it's been at least 2 weeks. We know that there was a time where he was going. So was he going for 2 weeks and then he's now not gone for 2 weeks? So has it been a month? Like, what's the full timeline here? We know that there has been an extreme amount of time anyway, but it still seems like things were moving a little too fast. And I wish they had just slowed down in some instances to let us see him really trying to sit with and work through some of these things. I think that would have made the episode a little better.
Yeah, and to be fair to the show, while I agree with everything you just said, they only have 40 minutes to try and tell a story, so they're trying to get it done. So I get it. But yeah, I agree with you there. That it does seem like, wow. I mean, you're putting a gun to your head. I mean, seriously, he puts the gun under his chin. In this, or the phaser, that is. I mean,
that's like him. It's the gun. Like, that's the thing too. Like, because of sci-fi, we do tend to diminish these things a little bit, and we do rely on the actors doing a lot of heavy lifting here because the props they play with do tend to, can be construed as ridiculous, at times. So, but still, like. Yes, he was sitting there with the gun to his head. That's what that was. Right. That's what that was. And they wanted us to kind of follow along on the spiral with him for this.
Yeah, the thing for me is I'm not sure I buy, like, for example, him being angry at Quark for not getting him his synthale. Okay, first, so it makes sense that the synthale is like he wasn't getting his food on time, and so he is remembering that. But it's hard for me to reconcile him acting violently toward Quark quite that way. Like, again, if he's feeling trauma over having murdered someone, why isn't he having a panic attack? Why isn't he having flashbacks in that moment? Why isn't, instead of him grabbing Quark and holding him to the bar, holding him down, why isn't he like, I like, why wasn't he having a moment of emotional trauma of like, I can't get what I'm asking for. This reminds me of being in prison. Instead, he just gets angrier and angrier and angrier. Like, let me put it this way. I don't think they filmed that scene quite right. It should have been like the camera should have been shaking. It should have been more in and out. Like his vision, like he's having flashbacks to this terrible memory, as opposed to him just getting angry at Quark, because that's a normal thing. Hey, sorry, I can't get to you. I'll get to you when I can. And then all for a synthale. It's not even food. It's not even regular food off of a replicator. It's just a synthale. So like, if it had been like the replicator's not working, and like he has to fix it. He's the engineer. He has to fix the replicator. The replicator's not working. The trauma of him not remembering how to do things because 20 years have passed and he can't get the food. And then like that would have been a spiraling moment. That would have made a lot of sense, I feel. So I feel like this episode had some good things to say. I especially want to say the Bashir O'Brien relationship is really good here, but I'll get to that in a moment. Mm-hmm. This is an episode I feel like I'm nitpicking. I'm nitpicking the problems that I feel like it had because it's telling an important story. First off, how crazy is it, the idea that an alien culture could implant memories in people and use that as a punishment? And how is Sisko not flipping his lid? Maybe he is off screen, where he is telling this alien culture that you will never do that to one of his people ever
Absolutely.
Again.
Now they tried to fast walk us past their explanation for that. So if you remember, what they said was that he asked a few too many questions, whatever. He was accused, tried, convicted, sentenced, and punished all before word got back to the station. Yeah. So that was their explanation. It's like, by the time they figured out, or if they found out what was gonna happen, it had already happened. Right. So there was no time for any Starfleet officer to intervene or whatever. But still, Sisko there should have still been a scene of Sisko trying to, shout them down about, you've got to reverse this procedure. You got to figure out a way to fix my man, because, you know, he asked a couple of questions. We didn't get a chance to, you know, prove his innocence or guilt. You didn't.
Right.
None of the things that we need to do. Now, granted, they've done a lot of trial cases, and O'Brien's been involved in a couple already. So, you know, I can see them being like, we want to do one where Starfleet can't get out of it, where they can't clever their way out of the situation. And that's what we get here is, you know, that was pretty much the only way that it could be done was because it's like, basically the trope is always, if you give Starfleet officers too much time, they're gonna figure out a way around your problem.
Yeah.
So we gotta not give them the time, and so they took that away from us. But yeah, the fact that Sisko still wasn't ranting and raving at the people.
I have two answers to that. First off, our perspective is from O'Brien's perspective this whole episode. We don't really get much of anything. If O'Brien isn't in the scene, it's not in there. Everything is from O'Brien's perspective.
That's true.
So Sisko might be yelling and screaming off screen. But also, again, if they're from the Gamma Quadrant, this alien race, because, again, they did come through the wormhole, it might be that they have no way to threaten that culture. No way to say, you know, how dare you, effectively, because the Jem'Hadar are the ones that they fear on the other side of the wormhole, not the Federation. So, but I part of me wishes that I still had a scene of that somewhere, though, as you're saying, is like, how the hell is anyone ever going to let this happen again? How dare you?
Right. And, you know, and Starfleet is always trying to, you know, expand. You know, they want peaceful coexistence with everybody, and they hope everybody eventually joins the Federation. So to know that the Argathi people do this, not only to their own people, but clearly to anybody that falls under, you know, that comes across their planet or whatever. Right. I mean, there's got to be some kind of follow-up to that. And then my question with the technology is, if you're able, how are they able to implant those memories so thoroughly that he truly believes he lived this experience?
Right.
What are they basing that off of? Like, were there people at one time who served these long, hard sentences and they used their memory engrams to kind of implant this into a person? Because there's got to be some kind of foundation for how you can get a person to so completely believe they have lived a sentence of 20 years in this prison.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, there's no, as far as Star Trek is concerned, there's no technology that can't be undone. So again, I mean, I would want to know a bit more about it, but everything that we're told so far is always, it can't be undone, not without erasing O'Brien's memory entirely. And we don't want to do that. And there has to also be some kind of suppression in there of your normal memories and of time span and things like that, because he came out of it and he barely remembered that Keiko was pregnant. He could barely remember the tools that he used to do the job that up to this point he had done every day.
Right.
You know, so there has to be so many different things that are worked in there. I mean, I know that those are things that we're never going to ever have explained in an episode. Right. But for them to come up with such an inescapable technology with such deep ramifications is another thing that kind of sits wrong with me. Like, I would have liked perhaps that if the episode was him struggling with everything, sure, but then right towards the end, Bashir comes up with a way to not necessarily erase the experience, but maybe mitigate it to some degree. Allow it to not be so impactful.
You know, scale it back. That is actually a really great point, because my understanding of PTSD, and I am not an expert, of course, but is that it triggers a physical response in your body. And so if Dr. Bashir could actually, hijack the physical emotional response and allow O'Brien to channel those feelings and those memories, I didn't actually kill anybody, therefore I don't have to feel guilty for it. That would actually make sense, because that is what's so beyond the whole idea of 20 years of your life supposedly being wasted, and then realize, okay, they're not wasted. Like that's how you would. I was thinking of how you would argue this culture. How dare you do this to someone? Well, it's not like it took his correction took a couple hours. As far as his life is concerned, he still has all his whole life ahead of him.
He still has all that time, right? He's not an old man.
He's not actually served 20 years. He just felt like he did. But for me, being put in a position where I murdered someone, Like, that's the real trauma for O'Brien, obviously. That's why he's putting the gun to his own head. But it's a fake trauma. He didn't actually do that. But then if someone convinced me that I had murdered someone else, of course I'm going to ask myself, why am I that kind of person that would kill someone else? What kind of man am I that I would kill someone in rage, in a fit of rage, or casually or whatever? That's the real trauma they do to O'Brien. So yeah, if Bashir could hijack the physical response and turn it away and make it so that he doesn't have the mechanical responsiveness of his body to the trauma or the memories, that might work. He still has memories of it, but the memories would be like any other memory of like watching a TV show.
Right, allowing him to be again, not to erase the experience from him, but to allow him to be a bit more objective and distant with it a little bit,
right.
So that we would have gotten both. We would have seen, throughout the episode of him trying to struggle to acclimate, because there's a very real possibility he's going to be stuck this way, so he will need to learn how to adjust. But then ultimately, Bashir coming through with some of that tried and true Star Trek magic and Federation magic, and again, not taking away the whole experience, but mitigating it to a degree that would allow him to better cope and move on with things.
Yeah.
And that's been done several times in Trek. Voyager did it a few times with characters, and there was actually a similar storyline. One of the characters in Voyager was accused of murder, and his punishment was every 10 or 12 hours, he would have to relive the last moments of the murder, because they had the ability to take the memory of the victim, their last memory, and implant it in the criminal.
Crazy.
And then there were some mitigating circumstances there as to why it wasn't really him, and so forth and so on. But they did have the ability to undo the procedure, but the character was still left with the memories and things that he had to eventually work through.
Right.
And another character had some, violent tendencies that were supposed to be erased, but there was some, again, some other things there. But basically, it was the punishment was measured out, and then they found ways to kind of dial it back a little bit to not fundamentally alter a character. They don't do that for O'Brien here. He is forever changed, or should be, because he doesn't have the ability to his treatment is therapy. Not we're gonna magically hook something up to your head that's gonna scale it back or whatever, but you have to go through trauma counseling and so forth. Which begs the question, in Star Trek or in Starfleet, I guess, what would qualify as trauma? Because there's so many times we see characters go through absolutely devastating things only to have it fixed a little bit later.
Yeah.
So it would seem like if you have to have a trauma counselor on your ship or on your station or whatever it is, you must be going through some particularly awful things for them to have to be there.
And they would be used quite regularly at that. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think you are right too that we should have seen him talk to the counselor. I mean, Counselor Troy did some of that in TS, The Next Generation, TNG. So there were some moments where she did that kind of stuff, but I also remember that a lot of times it was her that was having the problem.
That's true. That's true. A lot of the times, a lot of the times the traumatic event was happening to Troy. So how do you counsel yourself? And then, and by and large, her function was more with diplomacy and negotiation and being a part of the Picard's team in that light than it was really doing a lot of therapy. We didn't really see her get into a lot of counseling stuff until later on in the show, again, 4th season and beyond. And in particular, I feel like the 5th and 6th seasons, she really got a lot of work as a counselor. We didn't really see that
really
a whole lot in the earlier.
That's exactly
as a standalone counselor. Right. She does other things, like she has moments where I guess you could consider that her counseling people throughout other things, but it was never like a full on, that was her purpose. You couldn't tell, was she being a counselor or a friend here or some kind of mediator in general. But so But yeah, you're also right. Like a lot of times when it did become something that needed to be severely impactful, traumatic, meaningful, whatever, it was to her or to her family, because Lwaxana definitely brought in a whole bag of trauma all on her own. So
yep. Yeah. So
Lwaxana Troy.
Oh yeah, and apparently we're gonna see her in 2 episodes. Like,
yes, we are
looking at the episode list. So yeah, this episode was interesting, and I think it has something to say. Again, I was surprised that they had him holding the gun to his own head in the episode. Like, I feel like that would be very controversial for the time. I mean, I don't know how much so today per se. I imagine it still would be, but for the time, especially early '90s, mid '90s, a character really thinking of committing suicide. Yeah. I just, it's so much. I have to admit, it's easy to go look at something and then say after the fact, here's how you could have done it better. And I always know that that's true. And I feel it's relevant. I mean, yeah, here's how you could have done it better. But I always feel like, it's so much easier to say that. So I always want to give writers the benefit of the doubt. They were doing what they could, and they came up with a story, and they had to shoot it. That at some point you have to commit with your option. You can't, at some point you just got to go with your choice. Even if you might want to change it later. So I don't feel like this is a bad episode. I would have made changes if I could retroactively do so. But yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I think that the episode is still a good episode. I think that they, worked it very well. It's acted very well. It's written well. Yeah, there are some nitpicky things here and there, but it's just not one that I enjoy for that particular.
It's not a fun episode.
It's not
a fun one.
But that's definitely also supposed to be the point. As we said, This is the O'Brien must suffer episode. They got into this habit of O'Brien being the character that must suffer the most. And even Bashir brings it up when he's trying to talk to Keiko and tell her, hey, O'Brien, he's changed, he's different, but if there's one thing we know about him, it's that he's resilient. He'll survive. He'll be fine. And he starts, rambling off all the incidences that we know of so far where O'Brien has suffered, going all the way back to the TNG episode, The Wounded, where, that was with Captain Maxwell, who hijacks his ship and starts staging attack runs on Cardassian vessels,
right.
and Miles had served with Captain Maxwell, and it was during the Setlik 3 conflicts, which we also hear referenced in this episode.
Yes.
We see that they referenced the Tribunal episode where,
about to say, season 2.
Yes, he was convicted with the Cardassians, and they were trying to sentence him. They were going to sentence him to death, as I remember correctly. We also had the Whispers episode where we didn't know if he was the real one or he was a clone, and they referenced that as well. And we watched him backtrack his steps there to figure
right, that was a weird episode.
I think that was called Whispers. Whispers was the name of the episode, and I think that was first or second season as well. And then, of course, we have the Visionary episode where he's the man at a time, and he's jumping ahead 6 hours into the station's future. And he's got the massive doses of radiation, and he's slowly dying. But the station's going to die if they don't figure out what's causing it. And it's the Romulans.
Right.
So, I mean, there's several times that O'Brien has been our, punching bag.
Yeah.
As it were.
That episode, Whispers, I'd forgotten all about it. Just seeing the Wikipedia quick blurb, remember what it was now. But that makes me want to go rewatch that one, because that was a very interesting plot.
That was a nice, intrigue episode. And again, it's always so interesting that O'Brien is put in these situations where he is thought of to be the spy, the inside man, Right. And it's kind of because he is supposed to be this representation of every man. He's so relatable. He's so down to earth. He's the family man, as we found out in Bar Association. He's the union man. He's your guy. You saddle up at the end of the day. You have a beer. You shoot throw some darts. You go home to your family. He is our representation. So he is our access point to this very high tech futuristic world. So to have him be the one who is suffering so much, that's the appeal, that's the draw.
Right.
So I definitely get it, but man, does he go through a lot.
Yeah.
Just absolutely a lot.
Yeah, he does. And I'm curious because I heard you say before as we started this episode off, O'Brien must suffer. I'll just ask you now because we're at the halfway point, or recently got there. Does O'Brien suffer more in the first half or in the second half?
I'm going to say the first half because the things that happened to him later, barring a few instances, seem to be more tangential. And what I mean by that, it's like there's other people who have things directly happen to them. Right. But because they are friendly to or significant to O'Brien in some way, he suffers as a byproduct. They're the ones who actually have the thing inflicted upon them, but because they were his friend or his student or his mentee or whatever you want to call it, because of that, he suffers as well.
Okay. Gotcha. And before we wrap this up, I don't know if we will soon or not, but I definitely, this episode really puts a cherry on top to the Bashir and O'Brien relationship has come a long way.
Yes.
It really has blossomed, and they have become good friends, and they care for each other. Bashir knows that O'Brien is the stubborn type, but also, I mean, he's proven himself to be the honorable doctor. He'll do whatever it requires to get his patient through whatever it is that needs to happen to get them healthy again. Garrick has already experienced that, I think, back in season 2 as well. So we know that that's the kind of man Dr. Bashir is. But remembering him from season 1, especially the episode with the smoke monster thing, where he was giving O'Brien a hard time for being the prophet,
he's the
type,
Sirah.
the storyteller.
He's the Sirah.
Yeah, and going from that to this is quite the change for the two of them. We've already seen the changes happen and occurring, but this one really is one where it's very important that Bashir is O'Brien's friend, and he's the one who's there to talk him down from doing the worst thing he could possibly do to himself, which literally is.
Oddly enough, I think that this episode really kind of helps to solidify their friendship. Now, and the reason I say that is because we know that it's been building over the past couple of seasons. Right. But if you think about it, most of their things that have been kind of the building blocks of their friendship has still also kind of put them as like adversaries to a certain extent. O'Brien still being very hesitant to fully embrace Bashir as a friend, despite the fact that Bashir has made it very clear, you're my friend. You can say whatever you want to. We're friends.
Yeah.
This is happening. Get over it. But O'Brien's just been like, I don't know. He's been very hesitant.
Right.
So this episode, you kind of see that when he comes back to the station after, in his mind, 20 years have gone past. And he's looking at everything in a new light. And when he sees Bashir standing there, he's genuinely happy to see his friend. He's like, and it's that realization that I have not seen this guy in 20 years, and I'm, despite everything, I'm happy to see him. I'm glad that he's here.
Right.
And then, O'Brien, it's Bashir is the one who follows up and checks up with him. He comes to him when, O'Brien goes back to work and stuff, and he's checking on him. He's the one that, when he storms off after that little interaction, he doesn't give up on him. He continues to try to contact him and call him and stuff. Keiko says when he walks to the door, Bashir has been trying to contact you for the last hour and a half. Where are you? Like, what's going on? Yeah. And then, even with all of that, and he, when Cisco relieves O'Brien of duty, and he goes and tears off his comm badge, and then he goes to sick bay, and he yells at Bashir, and then storms out. Bashir is still the one that tracks him down, and if you think about it, it's like he had to have known him very well to do that, because O'Brien took his comm badge off in ops,
right,
and he's been storming around the station ever since.
Right.
How would he have known where he was? You can't just do a random search for Miles O'Brien. It doesn't work that way. Right. We know that the technology is designed, basically the comm badge is your ID. It's your marker.
Right.
And he threw that in the lift.
Right.
So now no one can find him. But Bashir did.
Right.
And again, Bashir's the one who's able to talk him down, not Keiko, not Cisco. Bashir's the one that's able to talk him down and get him to kind of come back and try things again. So I really think this episode does just kind of solidify the fact that they do have a strong friendship. They do have a strong bond.
Right.
This is what's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great to see this. It's come a long way because, for a long time, O'Brien couldn't stand Bashir for the life of him. And so to see that relationship has blossomed. And it blossomed because Keiko was absent for a while. It was Keiko's absence that required O'Brien to seek, companionship elsewhere. And Bashir was the one
she also didn't fight it. She didn't get in the way of them being friends.
Yeah.
When she comes back. I was gonna say when she comes back to the station.
Bashir's missing you.
Yes,
O'Brien.
O'Brien, he misses you so much. I didn't want to say anything, but y'all should go hang out. Y'all should go do things. She very much encourages the friendship, which I think is great. You hear so many times of people and they get into relationships and your friendships drop away. Your focus is now your significant other. So having friends would, to a certain degree, would interfere with that. And that could be a problem for a lot of people because, what happens if the relationship doesn't work? Then what do? You now have no one to help you or support you as you move through this, for some people, difficult time after a breakup. So no, but she's very encouraging. She's very supportive of their relationship, and she doesn't mind that Bashir is the one who's able to track down her husband and talk him down and bring him back to them, bring him back to his family.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that I did want to talk about for this episode was Cisco's response to O'Brien. Because, he has his blow up with Bashir, which then lands him in Cisco's office. And Cisco's been pretty absent this whole episode.
Yes.
So now here he is, and his actions have now landed him into the hot seat with Captain Cisco. And this is also kind of a Cisco versus Picard thing here.
Yeah.
So they're having their heart-to-heart, and they're, he's talking it out, and Cisco's listening to him, and, he's laying it out for him. Hey, you haven't been to see Dr. Talori. You blew up at Bashir. You're just kind of all over the place with stuff. You clearly need help, and I want to see that you get the help. So you're relieved of duty. Now, instead of going 3 times a week, you got to go every day until he says you're all right.
Right.
And that's it,
right.
And, O'Brien kind of begs them. He's just like, I hear you. I understand this was a one-off.
Yeah.
Please, Captain. Right. Captain, I've never asked you for anything. Give me a chance. Let me work this out. And Cisco says, no. Just no. I wish I could. But no, you need to go. You need help. Go see these people.
Right.
I really like that he stood by that, not because it was a rule thing or anything like that, but because it was the necessary thing for his officer and, dare I say, his friend to get better. And I think that the reason why I say this is a great Cisco versus Picard moment is because I feel like Picard would have given him the benefit of the doubt to work it out. Yeah. I feel like
because Picard is the type to I don't need counseling either. So yeah.
And he feels like inspirational words and a close heart-to-heart are all people need sometimes in order to, right their ship, as it were. And that he's the man to do it. You don't need counseling. You just need a great
Troy.
Speech.
Go talk to Troy a couple times, and I trust that'll be enough. That's what he would say. Please reconsider seeing Counselor Troy. Not, I'm demanding that you go see Counselor Troy. I'm ordering you to go see Counselor Troy. It's reconsider seeing Counselor Troy. But yes, I will give you a second chance. But he would give them the ultimatum of, if you don't handle it, then I will remove you from the ship. I'm not just going to relieve you of duty. I'm going to remove you from the ship. That would be how Picard would work it. You definitely get the feeling that Picard would be like, but as soon as you screw up, Picard would turn on you a little bit more. He would be like, oh, you can't handle the stress? Yeah.
Right.
You can't handle it?
You can't do your duty because of stress. You're out. You're not on the Federation flagship anymore. You're out. And it would have been that would be the speech. give me one more chance, let me prove myself. And then we would be watching an episode from the perspective of, here's a person who realizes, oh my God, I've just hit rock bottom. Space Pope over here is now totally upset with me. I need to redeem myself in his eyes, and now I'm going to do everything I can to redeem myself. I'm going to go on the epic Enterprise apology tour, and I'm going to say sorry to everybody. I'm going to go see Counselor Troy and cry on her couch, because I know that will not only make her feel better, but it will make Picard at least seemingly trust me. And then as our clutch game-changing moment, I will put aside all of my issues and I will perform my job, not just well, but extraordinarily well, to the degree that only I could have done it. And that will redeem my value in Enterprise Jesus' mind, and I'll be okay. Because that's how they treat Picard. There's such a reverence for the man. Yeah, that it borders on deification. That's why I make those. That's why I make those statements. It's just don't disappoint Picard. Oh my gosh, don't do that. And I love Picard. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes the hero worship gets a bit thick. Yeah, in Next Generation.
You're right. Picard would have had not as interested in solving it. You can handle it, but as soon as it becomes an issue for me as captain.
Yes. That's what it becomes. It's like I have to be able to do my duty, because if I in any way upset Picard, he's going to get rid of me. He's not even going to give me the opportunity to do more counseling or whatever. He's kicking me off the ship. I've got to get this fixed.
Yeah. So, the episode would have also been, if it wasn't about the whole memory thing of O'Brien having fake memories, it would have been about them having a crew member that's been trapped by an alien race, and they have to negotiate his release. Otherwise, a terrible fate will befall their coworker, their crewmate. That's how the episode would have gone, because they would have been there, as opposed to we have to send a ship back to the station and then send someone back to get O'Brien. There's one other thing I just a small little thing that this episode reminded me of, which you and I have talked about before. But of course, the Count of Monte Cristo, the whole being thrown into a prison to rot away, and meeting an older, kinder, a prisoner, and something, a relationship developing. It's too bad they didn't have a prison break scene, but that, other than that, just remind me of that simple similarity in plot. So, by the way, part of the reason I'm bringing that up is because after I read Napoleon, the biography of Napoleon, I want to read the Count of Monte Cristo again, having planned to read it again for a long time. Because the Count of Monte Cristo happens amidst the whole Napoleon. The Napoleon is a small bit character, and his decisions help inform the plot of the Count of Monte Cristo. So
it's a great book. It's a great book. I can't wait to read it again. I read it. I told you about it. I was reading it during the pandemic, as a matter of fact, and. I know everybody was grasping for things to do during COVID shutdown. I couldn't have found a better project than to go through Count of Monte Cristo and just kind of ease my way through it. I wasn't reading it for class or anything like that. I was reading because I wanted to read it, and it's such a great story. And there's a book. If you have not read the Count of Monte Cristo, please go read it. It's great.
I look forward to rereading it, because again, I've read the abridged version back in middle school, a long time ago, but I still remember it. And I wish the movie had the movie that had with Jim Caviezel in it was okay, but in order to get it down to 2 hours, they had to cut out so much.
Yeah, I would love to see them do that movie again, but do a full let's try to make it a. There you go. That's a great idea. But I want it to be like a shot for shot. I want it to be a shot for shot one, though. Each episode is a chapter in the book or something like that. I don't know if that would actually work, because there are some parts of it that are a little slow. And then, if you're trying to do it again chapter for chapter, there may be parts of it that are just too fast. There's not enough material to make a full hour-long show, whatever. But just as close to accurate as possible. Right. I would love to see that for that story. That would be great. Yeah. But all right, any final thoughts on Hard Time and PTSD in general?
Yeah, guys, suicide's never the answer. Your problems are never so bad that that's the issue. That's the solution. Talk to someone, get counseling.
I think that's universally agreed. I mean, there's a lot of people who we have a lot of different stances on a bunch of things, but I will say that I think across the board, everybody agrees that suicide is tragic and that there's always another option. Please, search for those options before you even remotely consider that. Talk to someone.
Reconciliation is hard sometimes, but it's better than the alternative. So if anything else, that's the great reason for this episode to exist.
You never really know who's in your corner. You never really know who could actually help you out. So just never feel that you can't ask. Always ask.
Right.
But I think that's a good point to end this particular talk on. I did want to go over a couple of things really just quickly here. All this Trek is obviously on Paramount Plus. We don't need to really go into all that. If you're not watching Strange New Worlds, you are really missing out on some truly just vastly different Trek.
I heard this last one did something crazy. I don't know if I should say anything.
Did it. It did. It was great. It was the musical episode. They did a Star Trek musical. And I've read. Bad thing. You know what? That's what everybody says because I've read all the reviews. For every review this was a raving success. There are so many that are like, I cannot believe they're doing this. This is not my Trek. It's terrible. It's awful. It's whatever. Now, as a person who I can say I have seen every single episode of every Trek in existence at least twice. Every episode. Okay, I can say that. There are some I've seen a good deal more than just twice. But every iteration of Trek, movies, whatever it is, I've seen them all at least twice. There's not one that I have missed. With that being said, the stuff that they're doing in Strange New Worlds is completely different. It's new. It's wonderful. It's new stuff. Right. If you want something for the sake of it being new, then this is it. They are trying things. They are trying to be different. And they're working so hard to not just say, we did it just to be different, but that it's different and it works. They're giving you good storylines. They're giving you good reasons behind why they're doing this different thing. So I will say.
I was just say, I don't know if you have to answer this for me or not, but I guess my assumption is that the reason there's a musical is because something happens where they get reality is warped into a musical reality. Yeah,
that's essentially it. That is essentially it. The premise of the episode is that they discover this weird ribbon in subspace that if they can figure out how it works, it will change the way that they can send subspace messages. Because in Trek so far, when you send a message via subspace, depending on the distance, it could take weeks before they get a response back. But because of this ribbon that they found, it could allow for near instantaneous transmission and reception of messages. So now instead of waiting weeks, you can get your message in real time. So they're doing an experiment to try to figure out how it works. The experiment, of course, in true Star Trek fashion, goes wrong. It alters their reality because they're dealing with subspace, of course. And it alters their reality and makes them sing. The number of Star Trek episodes that are filled with stupid or seemingly stupid or innocuous things like that, where it doesn't make sense that it would affect them in that particular way, but it did, and we just have to accept it because that's the episode. It's everywhere. And it's been going on since the 60s.
Right.
But this episode was a lot of fun. I found it to be very engaging. I thought it was hilarious. I thought that the singing was oddly good. Like there are people who you could tell that
they were actually trained singers.
There are a couple people on the cast who are legitimately trained singers. There are some people on the cast though who I feel like are not trained singers and probably had some crash courses in vocal lessons for the episode. They still pull it off because it adds an air of authenticity in my opinion, because they're normally not singing. So why would they be good at singing? You know? So yeah,
are the characters self-aware that this is not normal? I'm just curious.
Like, 100%. That's actually a whole musical number they do. Is called "Why Are We Singing?" So it's great. It's great.
All right.
So yeah, and it's like, and it starts out and it's like, oh my, like, yeah, why are we singing? Why am I rhyming? What's happening? What's making me do this? Like, there's whole beats in there that's just that. Gotcha. So, and then of course you get singing Klingons. Let me say that again. You get singing Klingons.
Is it opera? So
it is not opera. It turns into some like, it's like some weird kind of like K-pop dubstep thing. It was trippy in its own right. But yeah, I just go and watch it. Stop being so critical of things, people. Just sit back and enjoy it and laugh. That's what I did. I found it incredibly hilarious when certain characters just like burst out into song for no reason, you know, and you could kind of see the strain in them while they were doing it. So yeah, I just enjoy it, and right. It's fine. Every episode they've done so far in Strange New Worlds has been, there's been a certain thing that it was about. They've done a horror episode, which had some great jump scares. So that was great. They've done the communication one. They've done their comedy ones. This was the musical one, so forth. They're just trying new things and injecting new life into some old characters. You know, some of these characters, their names anyway have been around since the 60s. So we're getting to see them, you know, as fresh new forms here. So just enjoy it. But yeah, that's all I want to say about that. For those of us who again, like me, have seen every bit of Star Trek multiple times, you know it beat and measure, so forth and so on, and you're looking for something else to watch, what I wanted to talk about were a couple of shows that I found out about recently that are kind of like Star Trek. Now, I don't know how any of you feel about anime, but that's where these shows come from. Obviously, we've talked enough about The Expanse and Battlestar Galactica and things like that, Farscape, so forth and so on. So those are obviously great options. But if, again, like me, you've seen all those too, you may be searching for something new to watch. And one show that I just recently started is called Astra. It's an anime that's about a crew of individuals who just by happenstance get on board a ship that launches them into deep space. And they have got to figure out how to, one, control the ship, and two, work their way back from deep space to home. So watching them as they're trying to put together the pieces to figure that out, to do those things, has been very interesting. It is kind of Trek-like with, no one knows anything about each other, but then they start to figure out what their strengths are and get designations. Like this one, the obvious leader is going to be the captain. Here's your engineer. Here's your doctor. Here's your, so forth and so on. So I've been enjoying watching that. There was another show that I started watching that is another anime, but it's like a hardcore drama one. And that one takes a bit more to get into. And it's called Legend of the Galactic Heroes. So it's very much like Star Trek. It's got the space opera feel to it a lot, but it's really hard hitting, very kind of drama heavy. So the other one, the Astra show, is a bit lighter, a bit more comical, whatever. But this is kind of darker than that. So those are just two things that, if you're interested and you're looking for more sci-fi, and you don't have a problem with anime, I would suggest checking those out, just to add something to kind of break it up for you into things that you watch. If you just wanted to stick with watching Trek all the time, 100%, hey, more power to you. I'm not going to stop you. But I just thought I would throw out a couple options that just happened to have floated my way in the past week, and I've been checking them out and enjoying them so far.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, guys, with that, I think that's going to be it for us. As we say every single week, you can find us and follow us on all the various social medias, except, of course, for Twitter, X Twitter, whatever the hell. You can also watch us on YouTube. Yeah, you can watch us on YouTube. Ask us any questions, comments, concerns that you have there. And, of course, you can listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. Now, until next week, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.